Chapter 1. Blood and Ink. Picture a single page, and on it, a single company. The ink is barely dry. A field clerk has bent over a ledger by lamplight, counting horses one by one. And what he is counting will outlast the kingdom that pays for it. The year is 1471, and the page belongs to a captain named Rokossowski. His company is small enough to hold in 2 hands, a few dozen horses, a scatter of names. Yet it is the oldest such register to survive, and it survives because someone thought it worth writing down exactly, horse by horse, down to the color of a coat and the shape of a brand. No other army in Europe kept books like this. It is a strange kind of vanity, this obsession with the ledger, and it will turn out to be the one habit that lets a much later age see, clearly and in full, how this cavalry was built. It was not built by a king. A captain, a rotmistress, went looking for men he already knew, men of standing, and asked them to ride with him. Each man who agreed became a tawarsis, a companion, not a subordinate. And each companion arrived not with empty hands, but with a retinue of his own. Grooms, spare horses, servants, a knot of armed followers he had raised and paid for out of his own purse. A poor companion brought 2 horses. A rich one brought 24. Nobody standardized this, because nobody could. A company's numbers rose and fell with the private fortunes of the men who filled it. This was not army building, as a state understands it. It was consent, dressed as a muster roll. 2 kinds of riders filled these companies, and the register tells them apart before it tells them anything else. The lancers, kopinici, sat the heaviest horses, wrapped in full plate, visored helm, cuirass, mailed gauntlet, and carried an 18-foot lance built to shatter on first contact. Beside them rode the streltsy, lighter men on lighter horses, armored only in a half-coat of mail, armed with a crossbow instead of a lance, meant to open a fight from a distance and finish off whoever broke and ran. Neither type was pure. A company might carry 16 lances against 60 crossbows, or the reverse, and pay itself was set by the horse a man rode, and the iron he carried on it. A lancer's mount fetched a different wage than a bowman's. Into this mixed and unglamorous cavalry, a new word starts appearing. In a royal account book from 1500, among payments made to household retainers, a clerk writes a heading that had never stood on a Polish page. Before, hic sunt hussarze, here are the hussars. He lists them: Andrzej the hussar, Michał, Łukasz, each with his own companions. The names are wrong for Polish gentry, and one is unmistakably Hungarian. A chronicler of the same years explains why. Bands of rack horsemen, Serbs, refugees from an empire, being ground down by the Ottomans, had begun riding for pay along the eastern courts, shield in one hand, light lance in the other, in a style the locals simply called hussar fashion. The word itself, in Serbian, meant something closer to raider than soldier. It did not arrive with honor attached. It arrived as hired muscle, But hired muscle has a way of being absorbed. Within a generation, the fashion stopped being foreign. By the 1520s, field clerks were marking entire companies with a private shorthand, 4 letters, PPTD, for mailcoat, helm, shield, and lance. And those 4 letters meant a company had gone over entirely to the new style. The heavy old cuirass gave way to lighter mail. The closed visor gave way to an open, plumed helmet. And somewhere on the shield, more often than not, a wing appeared, or a spray of peacock feather. Decoration first and only, later a signature. It took the better part of a century for the mixture to settle. Not until 1598 do the muster rolls finally show it clean. Equites hussari, standing as their own kind, entire and alone. And beside them, just as entire, the equites kosaci, the light lancers who had grown in the same slow decades, out of the same border service. 2 names, finally separated from everything they had once been tangled with. Nothing about this was decreed from a throne. It had simply been assembled, piece by piece, company by company, out of what free men were willing to bring, and how a captain chose to arrange them. And in that quiet, unforced act of assembly lay the whole future of this cavalry, its glory, and 300 years on, its ruin, both folded into the same founding choice. An army raised not by command, but by consent. On the muster roll, the field clerk's pen sets down a word it has never written before, hussars, and around it the old columns of lances and crossbows suddenly read like the ancestry of something new. Chapter 2. The Quarter. The ink from that muster roll dries into a different kind of book. Here, in the royal treasury, the ledger does not count horses, it counts money, and one line of it has just been set aside for horses no one has bought yet. The year is 1569. King Zygmunt August has signed over a quarter of every zloty his own crown estates earn, and dedicated it permanently to keeping soldiers on the eastern frontier. Not a war tax voted by the nobility for one campaign and forgotten by the next. A standing fund, drawn from the king's own pocket, meant never to run dry. For the first time, the companies that had assembled themselves out of private consent are about to answer to something larger than any single captain's purse. The money goes first to Rawa, a town whose name means nothing on its own, but comes to mean everything to the men who depend on it. The royal treasury keeps its quarter there, under lock, and when the ordinary tax coffers run empty, as they often do, kings reach for Rawa instead. Batory himself, in the middle of his Muscovite wars, pawns the actual crown of Poland into that vault, rather than let the frontier go unpaid. A kingdom's regalia, sitting as collateral for cavalry wages, says, more plainly than any decree could, how much the border was costing, and how little anyone upstream wanted to pay for it honestly. Over that money stands a hetman polny, a field commander of the second rank, answerable directly for this force. And beside him, a pisarz polny, a field secretary whose job is arithmetic as much as record keeping. Every quarter of the year he rides out, calls the roll, counts horses the way the old company clerks once did, and pays what the treasury allows. The commission letters that create each unit, a practice already decades old, standardized first under a 1514 charter, fix a company at roughly 200 horse. By the time Battery reforms the system, that number has settled closer to 150. Consent still recruits the men. The state now signs their paychecks. What the money buys is a permanent watch, not a field army. Along the Podolian and Ukrainian frontier, where the border is less a line than a habit of Tatar raiding parties crossing it, small posts sit forward of everything else. A few dozen riders at Chmielnik, a similar handful strung along the tracks the raiders are known to use, watching for dust before it becomes a war. The bulk of the quarter soldiers stay back, ready to gather into something larger the moment word comes. It is a thin, patient arrangement, cheaper than a real army, built on the wager that early warning matters more than early numbers. The field hetman Żółkiewski, writing later on how best to keep this force, argues the wager is sound. 1,000 hussars and 1,000 Cossacks, he calculates, properly stationed on the two main raiding tracks, are enough to hold the whole frontier. Not because they can defeat every incursion, but because their mere presence has always been enough to keep the Tatars from pushing deep into the country and leaving that garrison at their backs. It is, he adds, also a school for young noblemen, provided it is kept in good order. He asks for one more thing, that the quarter money reach the soldiers whole, skimmed by no one who has no right to it. That last request is the one Histories does not grant. The fund has no fixed establishment, no guaranteed size written into law, so its numbers rise and fall year by year with whatever survives the trip from the royal estates to Rawa, to the frontier. In 1570, the quarter yields just under 72,000 zloty. By 1619, it climbs past 360,000, its richest year. And along the way, treasury officials, court deputies, and hangers-on with no claim on frontier money take their cut before a single soldier sees his pay. A garrison meant to be permanent spends its whole existence being improvised. It survives that way for nearly 80 years, funded, drained, refunded, watching, until 1648, when the frontier it was built to hold finally breaks at Żółte Wody and Korsun, and the Quarter Army, as an institution, ceases to exist. For now, though, none of that has happened yet. On the empty Podolian skyline, a single standing patrol sits its horses, watching a smear of dust that may be Tatars. A permanent watch the treasury can barely afford to keep there. Chapter 3. Why they could not be beaten. The dust does not stay a rumor for long. Within a few heartbeats, it thickens, gathers a shape, and the shape is Swedish infantry, 11,000 strong, drawn up in a long grey wall on a low rise outside Riga. It is the 27th of September, 1605. And the watch that once sat idle on a Podolian skyline has become a battle line at Kirchholm, staring across open ground at 4 times its own number. The Lithuanian hetman Chodkiewicz has perhaps 3,600 men, barely half of them mounted, and he has already decided what he means to do with them. On the right, Sapieha's riders are told simply to hold, to absorb whatever the enemy's heavy cavalry throws at them and not give ground. The center and the left are told to attack. Konstanty Wojna leads the hussars there. 300 lances aimed straight at the Swedish foot, while beside him, Tomasz Dąbrowa swings wide with a lighter screen of Cossacks and Tatars, watching for the moment the ground opens. Behind everyone, out of sight, a reserve waits under a nobleman named Lackey, committed to nothing until the hetman decides the hour has come. It unfolds almost exactly as drawn. Wojna's lances go in hard against the Swedish centre, and the pikes and shot buckle under the weight of it. Dąbrowa, having broken the horsemen across from him, wheels in from the flank and strikes the same infantry from the side and from behind. On the right, Sapieha's fight against the Swedish cuirassiers grinds on inconclusively until Lackey's reserve is finally released and tips it. By the day's end, the wall on the rise no longer exists. A count is taken afterward, one that gets repeated for 300 years, roughly 3,600 against 14,000. The few pouring through the many as if the arithmetic of war did not apply to them that afternoon. 5 years later, on a July morning near Kłuszyn, Hetman Żółkiewski draws his companies up the same way. A broad front, flanking reserves at each shoulder. Nothing held stiffly in one block. And the pattern repeats against a Muscovite army several times the size of his own. In the middle of that battle, a foreign contingent of German horse tries something the Poles have never favored. They charge in close order, fire their pistols at the gallop, and wheel away to reload, expecting the next rank to finish the work. A young officer named Maskiewicz watches it happen and later writes down what he saw. The Poles, catching the reloading horsemen still turning their backs, simply ride them down with drawn sabres before a second volley can be loosed. Fire discipline, it turns out, buys nothing against a line that refuses to stop coming. None of this, the sources insist, was won by iron alone. Good horses and a couched lance explain the shock, but not why men rode into it without flinching. European cavalry answered to medals, ranks, and royal favour. The men filling these front ranks answer to none of that. They are landed gentry themselves, sons of the same houses that vote the taxes and elect the kings, riding not for pay, but because honour and love of country are the only spurs a free man will accept. Zamoyski had said it plainly enough years before. An army of deer with a lion for a commander beats an army of lions led by a deer. But even a lion needs something to lead. Here that something is a front rank, bound less like soldiers than like brothers. Each comrade answerable for the man beside him. So the whole troop moves as one willing body rather than a column of hired hands. That willingness is built, not born. From boyhood, these same men train at the tilting ring, spearing a hanging target at full gallop, until hand and eye and horse move as a single thing, and they spend their unquiet peacetime years dueling, sabre, lance, fist, against the hardest teachers available, the Tatar riders of the border they have skirmished with since childhood. A man who has faced that kind of practice for 20 years does not doubt at Kirchholm or Kłuszyn that the charge will work. He has already tested it 100 small times against men who meant to kill him. So the 4-to-1 odds resolve, and the answer offered is stubbornly simple. No treasury bought this, no decree ordered it into being. It was bought only in the raising of the men themselves, in whose sons were handed a lance, and told that the choice to ride was theirs alone. The lances come down together, and 3,000 riders pour into 14, the shock deciding everything in the space of a single breath. Chapter 4. The Cooling of the Blood. We watched 3,000 lances come down together and decide everything in the space of a breath. Watch them come down once more. On a September morning above Vienna in 1683. On a ridge overlooking a Turkish camp spread across the valley below. The last time this cavalry will ever again settle a battle by charging into it. The camp breaks. It is written down plainly, without argument. The victory at Vienna is the last brilliant deed the Polish cavalry will perform. What happens afterward is not a single defeat. It is slower than that, and stranger. The wars against the Turks drag on past the old king's death, with losses now mixed among the winds. But the war that follows, against Sweden, brings nothing but losses. And the failures are not failures of the enemy's strength. They are failures of nerve. At Klisov, this same cavalry, splendidly turned out, mounted on the finest horses in the country, dressed as if for a parade, cannot hold its ground against Swedish dragoons riding broken-down nags, and rides off the field before them. 3 years later, at Warsaw, it is worse. 90 banners of horse, under 2 separate commanders, face fewer than 200 Swedes, and give way. One old soldier writing it down finds no comfort in blaming the generals. Whatever the cause, he says, where men do not stand fast and steady, loss comes faster than gain. Another chronicler, watching the same war, notes something bitter and precise, that these same horsemen fought hardest of all against each other, and went strangely timid whenever a Swede came near, that they took no pay for it, which was true, but should have defended the country better all the same. So it might have bought its peace from a position of strength rather than fear. The signs had been there before either battle. Some years earlier, preparing for a campaign into Moldavia, the hetman Jabłonowski had taken the lances away from the hussars outright, handed them carbines instead, and set them to guard duty, scouting, escort work, the ordinary chores of lesser horse. The hussars, whose entire purpose for over a century had been to break an enemy line at the gallop, took the insult without a murmur. It is said that Sobieski himself had already sensed the same weakening years before, and had taken to bracketing every hussar company between 2 of armoured horse at Żurawno, as if the lance alone could no longer be trusted to hold. A prophecy, already old by then, seemed to be arriving on schedule. As long as the lance and the hussar endured, the Pole would be lord of the field, and once the lance was gone, so would go the virtue that had carried it. The decay was not only in nerve, it was in the paperwork too, and in the empty saddle, where war had once been the whole schooling of this cavalry. Peace now stretched on without end, and nothing filled the hours the old campaigns once did. The tilting ring stood empty, the duels stopped, command itself began slipping from soldiers into other men's hands. A company's lieutenancy, once held by a fighting man, could now be filled by a local judge, a clerk, a minor official who did his soldiering from behind a courtroom bench rather than a saddle. In peacetime, a korongiv answered to no real hierarchy above it, no discipline, no inspection worth the name. It survived, technically, on a muster roll, and little else. One line from the period puts it as bluntly as history allows. This cavalry, after a certain point, existed only in name. Not every horseman in the Commonwealth service decayed at the same pace. The dragoon regiments, raised and drilled on the foreign model, under foreign officers, held their standard through these same quiet decades. Proof, if any were needed, that the rot was not simply the wearing out of horses and men. It was particular to the old native companies, the ones built on inherited habit rather than imposed discipline, the ones that had once needed no outside master because honor itself had been the whole of their discipline. Now that the honor had gone quiet, nothing else had been put in its place. Nothing broke it from outside. No single battle undid what 4-1 odds at Kirchholm could not. It simply stopped needing to be tested, and the moment the testing stopped, so did the fire that had always depended on it. The same fire the comrades of Kirchholm and Kushin had carried into the charge without a flicker of doubt. On the heights above Vienna, the last great charge broke the Turkish camp, and somewhere in those same ranks, not long after, a hussar was ordered to give up his lance, and did without a word. Chapter 5. The Names That Died. We left that lance in a surrendering hand, and here is where it comes to rest, hung on a wall, wings still riveted to the backplate, feathers gone grey with dust. Nobody climbs up to brush away anymore. It hangs the way a retired tool hangs, and around it, in the estate offices of the 1760s, clerks are bent over a different kind of record. The muster rolls the new military commission has ordered drawn up, one company at a time, to see what is actually left of the cavalry that carries these old names. What the rolls show is not an army. In one armoured company, the lieutenant is 30 and has held the rank 9 years, which means he was given it at 22. The cornet has not been seen with his men in 7 years. Of the men still counted as present, most have quietly stopped attending, sending a paid substitute in their place and drawing full pay, while sitting at home. In another company, the captain, a young man named Mionczynski, commands troopers, old enough to be his grandfather. One veteran on the books is 86, 62 years a soldier, carrying old wounds and no longer able to sit a horse for long, kept on the roll. Because the roll is the only home the army has ever given him. Elsewhere, the opposite failure appears. Boys of 5 and 13 entered as full comrades, sons and grandsons of captains, drawing a soldier's pay, before they can lift a sabre. Horses are missing too, phantom mounts that draw feed money for animals that do not exist. The commission writes orders demanding these names be struck out. The names stay on the books for another 20 years. To even see this clearly, the Commission first has to organize the seeing. It divides the whole native cavalry into 4 regional districts: Greater Poland, Lesser Poland, Podolia, Ukraine, and sets a regimentards over each. An officer whose entire task is to answer, honestly, what is actually standing in his district's companies. The answer, district after district, is the same wreckage in different names. It is against this inherited wreckage that the Sejm of 1776 finally acts, and it acts by ending, not mending. Every hussar company, every armoured company still nominally standing, is folded into 4 new brigades of a national cavalry, and the light companies into new front guard regiments. The last commission letters naming a man to hussar or armoured rank are signed that year, and never again. And the striking thing, set down plainly in the record, is that no one mourns it. The armour had become a burden its wearers no longer earned. The name of hussar had, by then, been carrying a nickname of its own. Funeral nights, men called out mainly now to give ceremony to burials, and burying, in the process, whatever remained of their own reputation. Pancherny and hussars alike go under the new name without complaint, because there was, by 1776, almost nothing left to defend in the old one. The same statute even ranks the new officers above their foreign-drilled counterparts, a lieutenant of the National Cavalry now outranking a colonel of the line, as though a name on a commission could restore, by decree, what the companies themselves had already let go. What rises from that dissolution is, on paper, a modern force. New standards are stitched for each brigade, one face reading for faith, king and country, the other, conquer or die. And a decade later, a fresh drill arrives. The 1786 regulation, laying out the cavalry's charge in careful, numbered steps. Ranks closing at the trot, the lance couched level at the command to advance, the line breaking into a gallop only in the final strides before impact. Every movement of hand and horse accounted for. It is thorough. It is also, in its own quiet way, forgetful. Nowhere in its pages is there instruction for holding a reserve at the flanks. The old precaution that had guarded the wings of a charge for 2 centuries, and that no one thought, this time, to write back in. That is the shape of the whole reform. In the end, a regulation exact enough to satisfy an inspector, arriving at a company that had already forgotten how to muster a full one. The men it was meant to discipline had already stopped answering their own roles a generation before it was signed. A modern cavalry was built, correctly, on paper, and it came to stand over ground that had been hollow for 20 years, before anyone thought to draw the new lines. We are left, at the close of it, with a kind of funeral conducted in very good order. The winged armour hung up for the last time, like a relic in a chapel. And on a final list, in a clerk's careful hand, the words hussar and armoured, written down once more, and then never again. Chapter 6. The blood that would not answer. We left a clerk's hand closing one register with a name never to be written again. Here, a few years on, another clerk opens a fresh one. It is October of 1788, and the Sejm has just voted a 100,000-man army into being. And inside that vote, a single stroke more startling than the rest. The cavalry, some 6,000 strong, is to be raised to nearly 22,000, not doubled, nearly quadrupled, in one legislative breath. It is a decision made in a fever of patriotic feeling, and it is made the old way. No one asks whether an army can be grown that fast, or with what men, or paid for, out of what treasury that isn't already thin. The task simply falls, as it always has, to the rot mistress of each company, who is handed a sum of crown money and told to fill his ranks by spring, and who keeps, as before, the private right to name his own lieutenants, cornets, sergeants. A colonel writes the king for a nod that is never refused. The real choosing happens at a much smaller table, where a captaincy can still be handed to a nephew or a favourite for the price of a good dinner. The instructions from the War Commission run to a dozen careful points. Recruits should be young, sound, mounted on horses no shorter than the regulation handspan, sworn in this time, on an oath the old companies never bothered with. And beneath every careful point sits the same unexamined faith that if the crown calls loudly enough, the old blood will rise to answer, the way the story has always told it that blood rises. For a while, the roles fill, on paper. Regiments of the front guard take in Tartars alongside the Polish gentry, precisely as instructed. Dragoons, the one branch built from ordinary countrymen, the one arm that never pretended to noble blood, are reorganized to look like the national cavalry, dressed in its style, drilled to its pattern, as though a uniform could confer what birth had once supplied. And then the war comes, in the spring of 1792, and the paper answers a different question than the one it was written for. Before the army's march, the cavalry is quietly split in two. An active force meant for the field, and a reserve meant for guarding the country's own tribunals, its treasuries, its tax collections at home. The split falls out company by company, and when the tally is added up, it is damning in a way no clerk seems to have intended it to be. Of 384 comrades on the books, 240 choose to stay behind. The very men the whole reform was raised around, the front and the ornament of the army, drawn from pure noble blood, promoted above their turn, paid above the common rate, wrapped for generations in every honour a grateful country could offer, decide, almost as one, that home duty suits them better than the war. What is left to actually ride out, company after company, comes to 12 comrades standing beside 90 rank-and-file troopers who were never noble at all, Tatars who owe the Commonwealth nothing but a wage saddle, up without being asked twice, peasants who have never held a title ride into the same war the gentry is declining to fight. A force built deliberately, twice over, to be an army of noblemen has become, in practice, and without anyone voting for it, an army of common riflemen on horseback, the very thing the Sejm least intended and could least admit. The verdict a later historian would set down is plain enough to need no dressing. The course of history proves stronger in the end. than any will bent against it. And waiting on the far side of the border stands a Russian force so far beyond the 20,000 Poland could muster that the arithmetic alone, before a single charge is ridden, has already decided how this war ends. What quadrupled on paper in 1788 could not be quadrupled in the one thing that had ever made it formidable: the willingness of well-born men to bleed for no wage but honor. That willingness, once, had needed no decree to summon it. The whole story until now had insisted a nobleman rides toward danger, because it is who he is. Here, called on directly, by name, for the country's actual survival. That same blood found somewhere safer to stand. On the muster field, the noble ranks stand thin, 12 where 150 were once promised, while beside them, the despised commoners, and the Tatars swing up into the saddle, to ride toward a war the comrades will not. Chapter 7. The Verdict. Too late. We walk the same thin ranks the war left behind, but a different figure moves down the line now. Not a recruiting officer, counting hopeful names onto a fresh roll. An inspector, counting horses that turn out not to exist. It is 1791 in the Wielkopolska division, and the man doing the counting is Kazimierz Rzewuski, a field writer of unusual patience, and no patience at all for excuses. He works down the squadrons one by one, and what he finds does not vary much from company to company. Head counts padded on paper, feed drawn, quarter after quarter, for horses that were sold months before and never replaced. Ledgers scraped smooth where a figure used to sit, then written over with a smaller one. Officers who go suddenly, conveniently ill the moment an examination is announced, and are found on closer inquiry, serving quite healthily as quartermasters under another name. A colonel who tends his own estate near the river while his command tends itself. A brigadier who, in all his years at that rank, never once rides the length of his own brigade. The worst of it isn't dishonesty, it's incompetence dressed as rank. Lieutenant Dzierżanowski can barely write a report and cannot, by Rzewuski's own account, sit a horse. Major Łaszczyński is handed a division to maneuver on open ground and cannot turn it. A simple change of front dissolves into confusion, squadrons wheeling the wrong way, and it takes the better part of an hour in front of two generals to walk the mess back into a line. Horses change hands so often. Officers, deputies, comrades, all trading freely, since the animals are technically their own, that no mount ever stays long enough in service to learn the sound of gunfire or the press of a formation around it. Rzewuski asks, more than once, for a month's grace before these men are promoted further. The commission does not always listen. None of this would matter so much if the failure stopped at bookkeeping. It doesn't. The whole worth of Polish cavalry, from its first muster roll to its last, had rested on one thing: the character of the noble men who filled it. That element is the one now rotting from the inside. Commissions go to men chosen for a name or a favor rather than a skill, sold off by captains raising companies as casually as they'd settle a debt. Command of entire divisions falls to men whose only qualification is a title Among them, Szczęsny Potoki and Michał Lubomirski, placed at the very top of the army, despite loyalties that already point elsewhere. The battlefield delivers the verdict the ledgers only hinted at. In 1792, the cavalry is beaten at Boruskowce, beaten by Cossacks, troops it had once been bred to outmatch without a second thought. At Zielince, Mokranowski manages to throw back a Russian charge, and the moment stands out precisely because it stands alone. By 1793, no one even has to order the cavalry reduced. It reduces itself, quietly, from 20,000 down to a remnant of a few thousand, men simply not appearing for a service that no longer holds them. What's left rides into 1794, tangled in with raw recruits. And at Maciejowicz, where infantry stands and is cut down holding its ground, the cavalry that should have held beside it turns and runs. What Polish cavalry becomes in its last years is a shape in transition. The noble element withdraws from it, company by company, and common men fill the space it leaves. Within a generation, under Napoleon and the Duchy of Warsaw that follows him, the pattern sets for good. The slakter keep the officer's rank, and peasants, townsmen, small gentry fill every saddle beneath it. The very men once thought unfit to carry a lance carry it to Somosierra, to Dęba, Stoczek, Boremel, Kustotza. The same kind of victory the story opened with, won now by different hands. Here, at the end, the verdict and the inheritance turn out to be the same fact seen twice. The reform that might have saved this cavalry belonged to the end of an earlier century. Not this one. It arrived 100 years too late to matter, and the element it was built to serve had already spent itself past saving. Fredro's old prophecy said that as long as the hussar rides, so long does the Pole hold the field. The hussar is gone, but the lance he set down doesn't fall. It passes into hands the old order never thought worth arming, toward battles the old order will not live to see. The script was based on the book Historya jazdy polskiej, authored by Konstanty Górski and first published in 1894. Thank you for watching. Until the next journey begins.